Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, maybe for some of you. We're just going to let the rest of the people join the webinar from the waiting room, and then we'll kick off today's webinar. A few more stragglers coming in, so just give it another couple of seconds here. All right, let's get started. Well, welcome to today's webinar, which is called Navigating AI in Workplace Investigations. This webinar is brought to you by Queen's University IRC, and my name is Lindsay Van Zulen. I'm the Sales and Marketing Manager here at the IRC, but I'll also be today's moderator for today's exciting session. So just before we begin here, I'd like to acknowledge that Queen's University is situated on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee First Peoples Territory. We make this statement in an act of reconciliation, honoring the land and Indigenous presence here, which dates back over 10,000 years. We're very grateful to be able to live, learn, and play on these lands. So before we dive into today's topic, I would like to take another moment here just to go over a couple of housekeeping items. Firstly, this webinar is going to be recorded. So if you need to leave early or you miss a portion of the presentation, a link to the recording will be provided to all of today's registrants. Secondly, please feel free to submit any questions that you may have via either the chat box at the bottom of your screen or through the chat function. We will save all questions to the end of today's presentation. Now, please join me in welcoming your facilitators for today's webinar, Devan Corrigan and Deborah Hudson, who will be guiding us through the opportunities and risks that are associated with using AI in workplace investigations. Devan is a seasoned expert in workplace investigations and labor relations, bringing over 20 years of human resources experience to his consulting firm. His firm specializes in conducting workplace investigations, specifically investigating complaints related to harassment, discrimination, workplace violence, and other forms of misconduct. Devan holds a Master of Industrial Relations from Queen's University, an honors degree in psychology, and a certificate in human resources management from St. Mary's University. His unique blend of expertise in HR and psychological positions him as a trusted, neutral third party. Before founding his firm in 2017, Devan held management positions at prominent Canadian organizations. He's currently the lead facilitator for our fact-finding and investigations program, as well as our new advanced workplace investigations skills program. He's also written some thought leadership articles on workplace investigations for Queen's IRC. And Devan, welcome. We're happy to have you here today. Deborah, who is our other facilitator for today's session, is a founding partner in Hudson Sinclair LLP. She's practiced labor and employment law since being called to the Ontario Bar in 2008. She represents employers and employees, advising at all stages of employment relationship, including contracts, accommodations, human rights matters, and termination. Deborah emphasizes the importance of early and productive resolution discussions when possible and appropriate. In circumstances where a resolution is not achievable or advantageous, Deborah advocates on behalf of her clients in all legal forums. She also conducts workplace investigations as an independent investigator, handling matters such as harassment, bullying, human rights matters, privacy breaches, and fraud. Deborah has authored and contributed to many publications concerning workplace issues, and she speaks on our fact-finding investigations and our new advanced workplace investigation skills program. Welcome, both of you. Today's topic really is increasingly important as investigators navigate the opportunities and risks of AI. So everyone, please grab your note-taking tools. Let's dive into today's session. So without further ado, I'll hand things over to Devan and Deb.
All right. Thank you, Lindsay, for the introduction, and good afternoon, and in some cases, good morning to everybody out there. And welcome to our webinar, Navigating AI in Workplace Investigations. And I have to say that we're all very delighted to see as many people that have registered for this webinar. Somewhere upwards of 260 people had registered. So certainly, I expect that this level of interest really demonstrates how timely and important AI is and has become for human resource professionals, workplace investigators, lawyers, and so on. So we really hope that today's discussion will provide some practical guidance in this area. So as Lindsay mentioned, my name is Devan Corrigan. I am a workplace investigator. As she also mentioned, I'm a facilitator for the fact-finding and investigation program offered by Queen's IRC, as well as the new program, which she alluded to as well, the Advanced Workplace Investigation Skills Program. And we'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the session, the new program. I am really, really pleased to be joined today by Deborah Hudson. And I'll just I know Lindsay kind of introduced her already, but I'll get Deb just to do a quick introduction before we jump into the slides.
Hi, everyone. My name's Deborah, and yeah, I'm a labor and employment lawyer, and a big part of my practice has become workplace investigations. So given that Dev and I both do lots of investigations, we also love teaching the course, and AI is something that we have to talk about. So usually when Devin and I start courses, we like to make some sort of, dad jokes. And so I went on to my chat GPT this morning to get my appropriate joke to introduce myself. And here it is. What is a lawyer's favorite food? Sushi. So that was like after about 50 or 100 jokes. Quite frankly, it was giving quite terrible results. So that's something that we're going to talk about a little bit. The risk of using AI, it's not always good, but there's obviously benefits to it too as well. So let's dive right in.
Yeah, Deb, it's going to be very difficult for me to try to top that joke. So thank you
Right?
for
It
that.
was such a
Yeah.
good joke. So I wanted to just start by sort of, discussing why does this conversation matter? So, AI is growing and it's being used around us, so we can't ignore it. Like we can't ignore that it's happening. We can't ignore that it's being used. I notice in my law practice, I'm increasingly getting tons of, whether it's complainants and investigations, sending me big document summaries made by AI, or employees who have been terminated sending document summaries. Sometimes I think it helps them organize things chronologically, and sometimes it's just spitting out way too much information, irrelevant information. Sometimes AI hallucinates. So those are all things that we'll talk about. But we can't ignore that it's here, and we can't ignore, the impact that it might have on our investigations. So in terms of like what types of AI we might be thinking about, like it could be anything and everything. So for me, one of the simple things that I use in some cases could be an AI transcript on Zoom or something like that. That's AI. Some people could use more advanced AI with respect to summarizing documents, organizing information. And it can definitely be used in a lot of different ways to improve your efficiency. Another way that it can be used is to help draft questions. You could use it in to try to think of how to draft this question in a neutral way, because that's a big struggle for a lot of the things that we do as investigators. Investigations, it's important because it's here and we're using it, but it's, we still need to rely on all of the things that we are doing in the investigation to be accurate, whether it's asking the question or the information in the report or in the summary of allegations. We also have to ensure that our investigations are fair. That includes us personally reviewing all of the information and not relying on AI. Confidentiality is a really, really big one. We shouldn't be uploading confidential information into tools that aren't confidential or at all. We can talk about that. And then, human judgment. So, AI sometimes is trained to give us answers that it thinks that we want, and it's not perfect, and it can't replace human judgment. So, it can support investigations, but it can't replace investigators. And Devin, do you have any comments on this slide?
I think it's a good summary of it, and I think the reason why we're really talking about this today is just the sheer amount of workplace investigations we all have to do now, and having AI as a tool to help kind of balance that workload is sometimes very, very I don't know, tempting to do. So you just have to have some restrictions and conditions around that, which we'll get into. All right. So let's talk about AI output as a starting point, not evidence. I think this is a critical slide, and Deb touched on a couple of the reasons why it is critical. So this slide shows us both what AI can produce and the serious, sometimes hidden risks of the outputs that it can produce as well. So to understand AI and its limitations, you have to first understand what AI is. So you have to look under the hood and exactly understand how it works. And most AI tools use what is known as large language models, LLMs, which are essentially just a huge learning machine. And that generates text by using predictive patterns, right? So, and they get their information essentially from a massive sort of scrape of internet data. And so AI may not know. It doesn't actually know what the words mean. It's just a predictive kind of thing to where it finishes a sentence or a paragraph based on what it's already had. So I think that there are two major risks for workplace investigators when they rely on AI. The first is a risk of omission. So if you, for example, want to take an investigative interview that you've done, that could be very lengthy, 120 questions, whatever it might be, to try to get a summarized version of that. You may feel that there are important pieces of information that AI doesn't feel is important, or the algorithm thinks that is unimportant. So there is that risk of omission. If you're relying on AI, you might miss something. And it could also completely miss the impact of a powerful quote or something that was said by a party. And I don't know about you, Deb, but in our line of work, nothing lands as solid or establishes fact quite like a direct verbatim quote that you could then refer to in your findings or in your report, certainly. So that's the first major risk I see with AI is omission. The second, and maybe more scary, if you like, is the concern of fabrication, and Deb touched on it as well. AI can confidently invent dates and invent sometimes evidence or information by using this pattern recognition or attribute statements to the wrong person. And these are all problematic for workplace investigators, certainly if you're going to rely on that. And this is what's known as AI hallucinations, right? So where something is made up or completely fabricated. So it could be something that's creating information that doesn't actually exist. So if there's an AI output that leaves you questioning your own grasp of reality, it's okay. Take a break, take a pause, breathe. You may not be hallucinating. It might just be the AI doing it for you. So I just assume that everybody's laughing wildly at that sweet AI joke, and I'm going to move on. Before I move the slide to Deb, I will say that the ultimate takeaway here for this slide is you must always verify the output of whatever the AI provides to you. Go back to the source of evidence. What is it? If it's an investigative Q&A, you have to go back to double check to make sure that it is accurate and verifiable. And with that, I'll pass it back to Deb.
I mean, I completely agree. Like AI can be a great starting point for certain aspects of conducting an investigation or compiling information. Again, obviously, as a lawyer, I have to say subject to things like confidentiality and different things that we'll talk about a little bit later, but it's never an endpoint. And you always have to make sure that you're on top of the information, that you've reviewed the source, and that you go back to the source because AI can get things wrong. So we can't completely rely on that on AI. We have to make sure that we're checking everything. Now I have to figure out how to change the slide. Um, so yeah, so this leads nicely into the next slide, which says comprehensive source verification is mandatory. So you can't rely completely on things like AI summaries. You always have to check against, the original documents and the original transcripts, and words and context have meaning, right? And also, like Devan said, AI relies on the large language model. And, the way that people speak, everybody speaks differently. They use different types of terms. And we have to make sure that, as investigators, as human to human, when we're listening, we understand better what it might mean than what a written transcript that is removed might say. So we have to make sure we're checking. Often AI can leave out important information, so we have to cross-check. So my practical tips in terms of comprehensive source verification are a few things. So first of all, You need to identify the source, page, paragraph for each important assertion. So you can even prompt AI to go back and do that if you're using it. Where did you get this from? And then you have to look up the notes for yourself. You can flag, you need to make sure that you're looking through all the evidence in the notes to make sure it's accurate. And you need to make sure your information is, what information is firsthand. This should be very easy the way you keep your investigation files in terms of your interview notes versus other things. But it does really matter that everything's verified because, when we teach the workplace investigation course, like it's all about procedural fairness and there's impacts if we're not fair. And if we haven't looked at all of the information properly or thoroughly, like we could have, an employer may proceed to terminate someone based on incorrect facts, which could have a real life impact on that person and that individual. And also the employer could have the investigation results overturned, putting cost on everybody involved, the employee, the employer, and all sorts of other things. So to do our job properly, we need to make sure that we're still thoroughly, verifying everything and right on top of the source information. Anything to add on that one?
No, I think that's well summarized, Deb. I think it flows well into our next slide on accountability. So let's talk about accountability. It's a very critical piece of what we'll talk about today. The key principle here being that, you could delegate tasks to AI, but you can't delegate your liability as the workplace investigator. So that is to say that the work and the responsibility of that work is yours as the investigator. You have to remember that AI is simply a tool. It's not a substitute for you as the investigator. At the end of the day, your name goes on that report. You're signing your name to when you submit that report, whether to your internal management group or to your client, like in the case of Deb and myself. So you have to make sure that whatever you're sending in is verifiable and backed up by actual evidence that you've collected during the course of your investigation. I'd like to share with you kind of what I call the human-only list, parts of an investigation that should, in my view, remain under the investigator's control. So the first is collecting the evidence. AI can help you organize a plan of investigation, but it can't determine what investigative steps maybe are necessary or what pieces of information or evidence are still needed. That's quite simply a human judgment that you'll have to make in terms of collecting the evidence. Second, very importantly, we talked about this in the previous slide with Deb, is vetting the evidence, making sure what you actually, AI as an output has verifiability. Whether it's testimonial evidence that you collected or documentary evidence, emails, text messages, are they in fact legitimate? Is the AI output actually accurately reflecting what it is you have? You may have AI send an output that is not correct, a statement that wasn't made by anybody. You want to make sure that you're checking that. Third is credibility assessment, something that I will say remains a human responsibility. And we know credibility involves such things as consistency in the evidence, corroborative evidence. These things must be balanced by human judgment and not relied upon by AI. And lastly, of course, drawing conclusions in your investigation. In my view, making findings of fact and determining whether or not they're breaches are two very nuanced things and very, very specific that should be done by, again, human judgment. And I don't believe that AI would have the capacity to execute it in the way that you would need. So again, a practical takeaway here is that AI, again, as we've said, could help with the heavy lifting. But at the end of the day, you own that final work product as the investigator. It's very important that you can back it up based on your own review of the evidence that you collected. And that's it for that slide. Devan, if you had any comments on that.
Sure. One thing that I notice with AI is that, and I was talking with somebody about it on the weekend, is that For a non-expert, AI often produces something that looks amazing, it looks polished, it looks smart. But as an expert, so I'm having employee side clients email me case summaries, how they're supposed to get $1 million in all these cases. And, we're going to talk about hallucinated cases in a second, but like, it's our responsibility as investigators, as experts, to actually know it better. And I can say right now, even though when AI produces something and it might look sort of nice on first glance, when you dig deeper, it often has, errors. So, it is important that, we know that the final accountability remains with us as the investigator, and that we really have to dig deep and make sure we're doing a thorough job because, using AI can actually take longer sometimes, and it's not producing like it's kind of good from far, but far from good. So ultimately, we are accountable and we're often investigating very serious things. Someone says they've experienced serious harassment, someone's being accused of harassment and can be fired, or, misconduct, theft, different things like these. All of these situations can have real life impact on the employees involved. And so we do need to remain accountable and to not be, over reliant on using AI when, the impact can be, really big on the people involved. So it's so important for procedural fairness and to ensure that we're doing our job properly. And there can be real risk by not doing our own job.
Yeah, great segue to the risk slide here. So as Deb and I have been stating, and I suppose restating, AI can be helpful again doing that heavy lifting that we talked about, but sort of a blind reliance on it is really asking for significant risk to kind of potentially find its way into the integrity of your investigative process. We've already looked at how AI can fabricate information. And we also examined how it could omit certain pieces of evidence that you would want to otherwise rely on. So those are two massive, in my view, red flags for the investigator if they were going to rely on AI outputs. But these glitches also lead to something else, another problem, and that's the issue of bias. So AI models train, we talked a little bit about the LLMs, but AI models train on human internet data, right? So information that's been inputted by us. They not only they don't just learn facts, they also learn and copy our biases. So, consider how much of an impact that could have in a workplace investigation if you've asked an AI, tool to help you develop a theory of a case. If you have a complaint or if you have something where you want to feed into the AI output to get some kind of strategy to go forward with the case. A theory of a case could be generated by AI, but it could be based in bias. So, as a result, as an investigator, you might get anchored to that theory of the case that's been developed by the AI, which would inevitably lead to maybe a confirmation bias where you're only accepting evidence, you're only really looking at evidence that fits that theory that was initially created by the AI. And we know that investigators oftentimes run into confirmation bias, and it's one of the biggest problems that we have with bias in workplace investigations. So that is I think a significant concern, is that this information isn't completely factual, right? That you're going to get from an AI output. And again, it's copying our biases from the people that have inputted this information. Again, so just a fairly short slide here. Takeaway is simply the investigator must, continue to think critically and not expect the tool to do that for you. This is essentially your investigation. You're going to have to do the critical thinking. You may have AI to help support you do that heavy lifting, but then you're going to have to use your critical, examine your information and whatever it will go into the report critically to ensure that it is, again, verifiable and accurate. Deb, any comment on that slide before we
Like
move?
this is going to lead us right into the next couple
The
slides
case
because I'm
one,
going to
yeah.
talk about a couple cases where AI hallucinated and some lawyers got in trouble. And, some of it might not be directly, if you're a workplace investigator, it might not be directly related to you finding case law, but you need to understand that it can hallucinate in different contexts. So before I talk about the Zhang case, I actually will give you an anecdote of something I guess about a year ago or so, I was drafting a demand letter. My client was a person who had been terminated right when she got back from maternity leave. And I went on to ChatGPT, didn't enter any confidential information, but just said, can you pull a couple cases from Ontario Human Rights Tribunal or Ontario case law where, someone was terminated after maternity leave, notice, like, and I gave it some information. I wanted some really good case law. And it gave me these three cases. And I've been practicing law almost 20 years, and they were the best cases. I'm like, how do I not know about these cases? These cases are amazing. And it gave me beautiful citations. Like it was on Canly, it gave me the citation. It looked so realistic, and I was so excited. So then I went to try to find these cases on Canly, which is a legal, you can pull cases. Couldn't find it. Went on a different source that we pay money for, Westlaw, couldn't find it. So I went back into ChatGPT and I said, like, I can't find these cases. And I had a little bit of a conversation with it, and it admitted that it made up these cases. Like it literally fabricated these cases. So even when I work with my junior lawyers, and if you have other staff, that you're working with, I know that people are going to use AI, but I always tell them, like, I know people are going to use AI, but one, don't put confidential information in, and two, you need to check the case law if we're talking about case law. And so this Zhang case is out of British Columbia from 2024, and it's a great example of why AI has to be treated as a starting point, but not an ending point. So in this case, a lawyer used ChatGPT to help with a court filing. AI produced what looked like perfectly legitimate case law, with names, citations, everything. Like it looked perfect, like the ones I had found myself. Um, and the problem is the cases didn't exist, like which had happened to me. And except the difference is I never filed them with the court or used them at all. I had it figured out by trying to, validate the sources, and it never went further. But in this case, the lawyer had filed with the court this whole their whole case and sent it to opposing counsel with all these fake cases. And opposing counsel had spent a lot of time trying to find these cases. And eventually it became clear that these cases were AI generated. So the problem wasn't that the lawyer had used AI, but the problem was that the lawyer didn't go back to source and didn't verify what AI had produced. So, and in any event, you can't just rely on AI because if not, you could have repercussions against them. And in this case, the lawyer had cost awarded against him for doing that. And how embarrassing would that be? If your clients found out that you did that. And this is a British Columbia case, but we've seen it all over the news at CNN and in relation to American cases. And I also read an article over the weekend, I think it was on CBC, about a self-represented, I think it was a family law litigant in Nova Scotia that had submitted a bunch of documents to the court in Nova Scotia. And they were all wrong because it was AI. And he tried to appeal the decision saying, look, AI did it, I didn't do it. And he lost. The court, it was not happy with him. The court was not happy in this case. And we talk about case law, but we can bring this back to workplace investigations because sometimes workplace investigation reports are produced in grievances, in litigation, and ultimately, it's just a big deal what we're doing with this information. So we want to ensure that it's accurate. And then, do you have anything to say on Zhang before I flip to the next one, Devin?
Is it too soon to generate? You could generate a couple of lawyer jokes around this case law. Is it too soon to do that? Deb, what do you think?
I mean, like the lawyer part is really boring. Like I always tell Devin when we're speaking, I know the lawyer part's boring and the case law is boring, but it's kind of important, right? Um, I don't know a joke for AI generated legal joke, but I do know another joke from ChatGPT.
Oh,
What's a lawyer's favorite drink? A subpoena colada. Huh? There
nice.
we go. We're making sure you're all awake over there. It's sort of
Yeah.
hard, not being able to see everybody.
Should have
Um,
led with that. You should have led with that one, Deb, I think, but it's okay.
I could use one right now, actually. So yeah, so this is just another case that just came out in July 2026 by the Law Society of Ontario. So Again, AI as a starting point, sure, it's fine. AI as an endpoint without verification, no. So in this case, a lawyer in Ontario had produced, again, citations, a court factum with citations from ChatGPT, relying on non-existent or irrelevant case law. In some cases, the case actually existed, but she stated a principle that did not exist inside the case, like falsely, and then in other cases, the cases actually just simply didn't exist. The judge then questioned her about her use of AI, and she initially blamed her staff. She blamed other people, and she the judge was obviously not very happy with that. So later, she also acknowledged that she misled the court on how the factum was prepared, and ultimately, she was suspended by the Law Society for 6 months, ordered to pay $10,000. And I should say, like, it's very hard for the Law Society to suspend lawyers. Lawyers are doing all sorts of bad things. Not me, obviously, but to have a 6 month suspension is a pretty big deal. But she misled the court. She lied about the citations. And again, this isn't a lesson, just take it outside of the context. Like AI is producing hallucination sometimes. So there's certain ways that we can use it in a very safe way. Like, for example, I think having Zoom record a transcript, that's AI. I'll tell you, my regular practice is to type notes and have the parties review the notes. And I think that remains best practice when there's serious issues involved, and especially when you're interviewing the parties, like the complainant respondent, because you want to give them the opportunity to review and verify and add to or change the information. Sometimes the AI transcript might not get every word right. So do you also have a recording too? You can use AI for a transcript and a recording, that's fine. But I wouldn't jump off the best practice of ensuring a note review for those important cases, and especially for the complainant and respondent. But for a for maybe for witnesses or something that's less consequential, you may use a transcript. But when we're relying on AI for more serious things, you do need to verify the sources, or else we can get in trouble. So moving on to the next slide. To you, Devan.
Yes, thank you, Deb. And I think just a takeaway from the previous slides is just, verify that source information. Where are you getting it from? Making sure that it's accurate. And responsibility, it does lie with the investigator. At the end of the day, you can't roll or delegate away responsibility. That's still yours, that you own. Yeah, let's talk about protecting operational integrity and essentially what that means. And what it means is it's really protecting the information that you've collected during the course of the investigation. I mean, ensuring that it stays in a safe place. You think about the files that are on your desk right now. Those of you that are conducting workplace investigations, we handle very sensitive information when we do this. So you're dealing with, witness testimony, which we've talked about, some of their evidence that they provided, emails, text messages, but also things like medical information that have been maybe supplied to you during the course of an investigation, very sensitive material, or even proprietary business information, trade secrets, if you like, whatever it might be. These are all things that I'm sure the organization may not want you to stick into an AI tool. So the moment thinking about feeding information into that external AI tool, you're opening really a massive box of questions. The first being, where is the data being stored? Who has access to it? How long is it going to be stored there? And is AI the AI company, are they using it to using the information that you supplied to train its next model, its next AI? And again, basing it on the pattern recognition piece. So before you copy a single word into any form of AI, just know exactly how that AI tool is going to handle that information. Another reality check is to do, to look at organizational policies. Organizations may not want you to do that. It may set it out in a policy. Just because you have a free AI tool doesn't mean the organization wants you sharing information with respect to a workplace investigation that could just be out there in the ether. At the end of the day, again, operational integrity really is protecting the entire investigative process and ensuring that it stays confidential. And that goes from the first interview that you conduct right up until the final report that you send. Any comments about that, Deb, before we move on?
No, and I think just highlighting too, like from an employer's perspective, one, considering, if you're someone that writes policies, do you need to ensure that you have policies so your staff know what they can and can't do with AI tools? Because obviously we don't want people putting confidential information into public
Right.
chat GPT. And then two, think about, is there an AI tool that we're comfortable using? Maybe that's a Microsoft Pilot or something else that we have a subscription to. And what are the settings on that? Like, for example, you can pick different settings, whether or not it stores information or not, or is it allowed to be used for their learning purposes? And you probably want to make sure it's not, if it's, and probably that they're never putting confidential information. Like, are they scrubbing it? So just from a policy perspective, just making sure that as an employer, you have a good policy, and as an employee, you're following the policy. Whichever hat you're wearing, you just want to make sure that you're doing it right, because you can be discipline for just putting confidential things into unconfidential AI tools. So we have to be careful about that as well. So it's just sort of an interesting thing, and maybe a bit off topic, but sort of relevant somehow, some way.
Absolutely.
And then the next thing we wanted to really talk about, which is obviously important, human skills AI cannot replace. And again, like zooming out for a second, like I can tell I'm getting a lot of, emails from clients that are AI generated and stuff, and it takes the person out of it. And I think that we need to, as workplace investigators, it's so important that we're there connecting with people. First of all, AI can't necessarily do the credibility assessment. What it can do is it can tell us where there's inconsistency in documents and evidence, but and contradictions. But we're the ones who are sitting in front of the person. Although I would say generally we're trained as investigators to say not to use demeanor as a way to assess credibility, and the courts say the same thing, because your witnesses and parties can be really nervous. They may react differently to different things. So you actually do have to look at the evidence. So, that's something to sort of think about. Another really important thing is contextual analysis. So sometimes when we're doing an investigation, there's a power imbalance. There's a sexual harassment complaint from a junior person against their boss, for example. So when AI might be, analyzing the information from a strict like data perspective, we as investigators have to consider power dynamics, like the difference between this junior employee and, this senior manager, or, the relationship, the other surrounding circumstances. So there's a lot of things that we have to consider in relation to the human context that may not be picked up in AI. And then for example, AI could be used probably in a pretty safe way to help draft neutral questions. I mean, I can tell you sometimes when the art of drafting neutral questions is hard. Sometimes when I'm trying to draft questions, I'll ask it how to ask this question in a neutral way. I won't input any confidential information, but I'll use it. And so you could consider using AI to help make a transcript, and then to sort of be a starting point for an investigation. But when you're in an investigation and someone starts speaking, sometimes they go to another area, and you have to be able to just ask questions on that area right away. You have to be able to pivot. I recently did an investigation where a witness was I asked her to describe the working environment, and it was very upsetting for her. And she was obviously having a very emotional reaction to all of these questions due to a circumstance unrelated to the investigation I was conducting. But I really had to pivot and change my question. So we can't just act like a robot and use AI, in the context of questions or any other thing for the workplace investigation. There is a human aspect. And that goes to also trauma-informed interviewing. Like sometimes people, I've had people, complainants come to me and say they want a trauma-informed approach more recently. And you have to think about all those things. And, outside of AI, you might be offering a support person and breaks, but you might be asking questions in a different way. You might be, listening to their answers in a different way. And you need to make the interview psychologically safe. So again, we really need to think about the people involved and the impact on the people involved. And, AI will deal with the data, but there's a big human part of doing workplace investigations, whether that's pivoting, whether that's being sensitive, whether that's, giving breaks that weren't scheduled, whether that's whatever else, you need to do. to ensure that it's fair. And I think that we don't want to take the humanness out of workplace investigations, and human judgment does remain central to fairness. So it's just something so important to think about. So I think it's not an answer to avoid AI. I think the answer is to understand what it's good at, and what it isn't good at. And just we can use it to help us process information and work more efficiently, but we can't use it to replace human judgment, context, and the care that sit at the heart of a good investigation. Do you want to add anything on that, Devan?
I just think it was a really good example that you used with respect to the witness that had what would seem to be a kind of a trauma response. And if you fed something like that into an AI, it may not recognize it, right? It may not recognize that that's what it was. So I think it's a really good point about that. And we, as to your point, Deb, we're seeing more of that type of investigative approach taken now. Trauma informed is certainly becoming more and more of a thing. But I think it's a great example. Yeah.
I think people are more aware of the terms to use, and people are more aware of what they may need, and some may not be. But in that particular case, the witness was very emotional, and it had nothing to do with my investigation. And she also knew that. But I literally had to change all my questions because she was having an emotional reaction to things that just didn't seem like you normally would. It seemed like she had some other experience. She was clear she didn't want to talk about that with me. And I'm an external third party. I'm not HR, so that's not my job to dig in there. I had to do entirely different questions. So you need to be ready to use your mind and to be a human and to treat the person how they need to be treated, and to pivot on questions. That's such a big one. I mean, that existed even before AI. We would have conversations in these workplace investigation courses that you can't just come with a script and not go off it, right? And I think it's relevant if you're using AI as a tool in any way to help. We need to really think about those things. So, of course, we have to talk about AI and confidential information. And then Devan said, Deb, you're the lawyer, so you get to do this slide. Um,
That's right.
so, okay. Well, so first of all, privacy laws still apply to you and your organization, whether you're using AI or not. So if you're public sector, there's even more rigorous privacy, legislation. And so you have to really think about that. And besides privacy legislation, just, the general duty for employers to keep certain information confidential. So you should not be uploading, medical information or probably names and different things. So you can't unauthorized disclosure of confidential information. So we just want to make sure that when we're using AI, that we're very cautious about how we're using it and what we're putting in. And like I talked about a little earlier, the settings that you have on and the specific tool you're using. Is this a paid tool that has good, well set up settings that's employer sanctioned or IT sanctioned or whatever, or is it not? You can put in scrubbed information like, put Jane and John, or you can, person one, person two, if that helps you. But you still have all legal confidentiality obligations exist whether you're using an AI tool or something else. So you need to be cognizant of that as a workplace investigator and how you use it. So so you only want to use approved organizational AI tools and whatever that looks like in your organization. And if you don't know, maybe you ask. Follow privacy requirements. You want to minimize what you're putting in, like you know, de-identify where possible. And I mean, I wouldn't be wanting to put in names, any sort of confidential information. I mean, as a lawyer, I would say do not do that, please. Um, and so the privacy regulators are all sort of thinking about AI, and I'm sure that a lot's going to come out in the next few years. But sort of one of the things they're saying is that de-identification and data minimization should be part of how organizations approach AI. And I think that over the next few years, we're going to see a lot of different legislation about AI. In Ontario, there was a recent change in the Employment Standards Act that say that employers have to disclose if they're using AI for recruitment. I think Devin was going to say that. Sorry, I stole your
Hey, you
point.
stole my thunder. Thanks. Yeah, that's
I
okay.
wanted to just look smart here. Uh,
Yeah, don't use the
um,
glasses. Yeah.
right? But the fact is, AI is being used a lot, and we need to really think about what we're putting in, and confidentiality is key. I would just say in a workplace investigation, when we start, and this was before AI existed, we always sent out, letters to maintain confidentiality and reminders of confidentiality. And so when we're telling everybody else to do it, we shouldn't be, we need to be respecting that too. And as HR professionals, are well aware that they're always, doing that as well. So, protect sensitive information and use AI in a way that is doing so.
Yeah, just two comments on that. I agree completely. Deb, confidentiality is, and I just wrote this as you were talking, confidentiality is not limited to the final report either. It applies to, the interview notes, the drafts, all the prompts, anything that you might have, any summaries or working files, it's all applicable, right? And, the convenience should never kind of override the overall duty to protect that information, I think is a good takeaway.
You just came up with that right now.
I
Wow.
wrote it while you were talking. Yeah, when you stole my thunder, I wrote it down. Um, All right, so this blends into our kind of our last slide, continue to build your investigative skills. And as you can tell, everything that Deb and I have been talking about today, the landscape of workplace investigations is always moving, it's shifting, AI being a part of that as well. And, staying ahead of these changes, whether it's, again, managing AI in a workplace investigation or handling complex files, workplace investigations, requires a set of tools. And this is the perfect segue to talk about what something Deb and I are really incredibly excited about is the new Queen's IRC is launching a brand new program called Advanced Workplace Investigation Skills that Deborah and I will be both facilitating. And if you've already taken what I call the foundational fact-finding investigation process program, this would be the next kind of the direct step next. We designed this program specifically to deal with and to tackle messy files, to deal with scenarios that we all really face every day. And that includes things like anonymous complaints, multi-party complaints, counter complaints, management-led investigations. All of those things. Trauma-informed investigations will include, as well as AI. AI will form a kind of a core module in this program. So we're very excited about this program and the new curriculum. Our first session will be November 30th to December 3rd. It'll be virtual. Where Deb and I will facilitate this program that we're really proud of and really hoping that you could join us. I don't know, Deb, if you want to lay into some of this, the great stuff that we're producing here for this program, or
I'm so excited about our new program. And of course, we're going to expand on AI and do a really good, module on AI. And we're going to talk about, I would say complex and messy workplace investigations are something that come to me. Like often they hire counsel, and I'm a specialist at all these messy ones. So I can't wait to talk a lot about that. And I'm just really excited to think about things like trauma-informed approaches and, sort of the next level things to think about if you already do workplace investigations and have that basic skill set, that we will have a conversation about like next level stuff. And I love that. And AI is a big part of that conversation. So that's going to continue. And I'm so excited to work with you, Devan and Queens, on our new course. It's very exciting. And I think with that, we can segue probably into questions if any of the participants have questions.
yeah, I think Lindsay might have screened some of these questions, and certainly Deb and I are interested to jump into them.
The free legal
Awesome.
advice
Thank
portion.
you. Yeah, that was wonderful. Thank you both so much. Very informative. I loved hearing about your personal experiences too, because I really felt like that's what brings these topics to life. So thank you. Do have a few questions here. So I'll just sort of read them off and let both of you then take it from there. So as investigators, do you obtain informed consent from complainants and witnesses about the specific uses of AI in each investigation? Do you use AI in cases where intellectual property is a concern? For example, cases where misconduct is alleged regarding a patent.
Well, I've never had an
Yep.
investigation on a misconduct for an IP issue, so I can't answer that question. But I wouldn't put confidential information like that into AI. I would say like I'm not always using AI to do a transcript like on Zoom, but when I am, I actually have them join the Zoom and I tell them in advance too. But I will say, like I don't have them sign a document, but I say I'm going to be putting the recording and the transcript on Zoom. Like, you know what I mean? Just so they know, or the transcript will be on Zoom because in some of my investigations, I have been using Zoom transcripts when we want something done faster, when it's less serious. And I absolutely let them know that I'm doing that for sure. I think that that's important. But I mean, generally, I think it's best practice to tell them what you're doing anyway. Because I say, I'm going to type my notes. You'll review my notes at the end of the process, or AI is taking a transcript, or there's a video. So I would obviously tell them that. And I would never like secretly record someone. I would say for investigators, unfortunately, people are secretly recording us all the time, and employees are secretly recording managers, and everybody's sending me secret recordings. And then they send me 5 hours, and I tell them I'm charged by the hour. They don't want me to listen to it then. But yeah, so that's my thing. I would tell them what I'm doing. I mean, if for some reason I used it to draft questions, there's no confidential input of information. I wouldn't tell them that, and I need not tell them that. If I'm just like, how do I draft this in a neutral way? I wouldn't tell them that.
Yeah, I do the same too in terms of the interviewing, having them review what it was I took as notes, and have it kind of done that way. Yeah, I'm pretty old school in the sense that I'm maybe not completely trusting of AI tools just yet. So I'm pretty limited when it comes to relying on it in any way. But yeah, so yeah, the same, Deb. I would say the same kind of outline that you have. I do the same.
I mean, it's best practices. Like we usually send out a letter at the beginning of the investigation
Yeah.
to talk about our practice and what we're doing. And that says, I'm going to type notes. You get to review them at the end of the meeting. You don't get to keep my notes. I am not making audio or video recordings. I ask that you don't do that as well. So all of those pieces I would normally communicate to them. And if for some reason I'm changing my practice to do a recording or do something different, because some organizations that's important, then I would tell them as well. So I think, yeah, like nobody should be secretly recorded or anything like that. And their confidential information shouldn't be used in the AI tools anyway.
Yeah. It speaks to the procedural fairness that you follow throughout, right? So I think that's fair.
Okay, that's great. I'm just noticing there's a couple questions. I think this one might be kind of aligned with some of what you've said. Is it required to disclose AI usage in investigations in Canada?
I don't think there's a legal
Yeah.
requirement to do that, but there's privacy requirements that you have to follow depending on if your, organization's public or private sector. But I don't think that there's any legal requirement at this stage.
Yeah, I agree with you, Deb. I think the investigator would fall in line with PIPEDA and kind of privacy information kind of disclosure. So I think that would be applicable. But yeah, I don't think there's been any legislation or statutes been drafted around AI. Certainly not that I've seen, not that I've been made aware of. But yeah, I don't think it's a requirement.
For employers who are subject to FIPPA and MFIPPA, do the July 1st, 2026 changes create any new considerations around AI-generated records, prompts, summaries, or other machine-readable information within workplace investigations, or is the practical impact relatively limited?
So I need to say, so I'm not a privacy lawyer. So that's the privacy legislation, FIPPA and MFIPPA. So because I'm not a privacy lawyer, I don't actually know the answer to that question. So sorry. But I'll look it up now. Like I'll look it up. Normally, if we were teaching a course, I would look it up and come after the break and come back, but I can't do that for you.
We're going to write that one down, Deb and I both.
Sounds good. I have it too, just in case you missed any of the words. So in terms of your recommendation not to use public AI tools for workplace investigations, as a third-party investigator, would you then use the organizational AI tools to assist in the workplace investigation, or do you use your firm's AI tools?
So first of all, I mean,
It-
I agree with Devin. Like, I think that the way in which that we use AI is more limited now. Like, but I wouldn't be using an organization's tools for anything. Like, everything I use is from my firm. I would never have access to the organizational tools anyway. And I think that would be the same for Devin anyway. So even if we're not using it now in certain ways, I don't see any scenario where I would ever be using an organizational tools for.
Yeah, definitely not. Yeah, the one I would rely on would be the one that my firm has for sure.
And we're like an independent, neutral investigator. So we shouldn't be inputting anything that we're doing on anything employer related, like to the point where, and this is old school, but like when I go to a client site and do investigations, I carry this little portable printer and I wouldn't send my notes to their printer, like,
Right.
because that's connecting with their system. I am separate from them, 100% neutral third party. So I take this portable printer and I print like from my printer. I would never put any of my information into their organizational, you know, systems at all in any scenario. I think that would take away from the neutrality anyway. But I
Yeah.
guess, as the situation evolves, I guess conversations need to be had about what can we use and what can we not use. But I'm still of the mind that no confidential information should be going in these tools anyway.
Yeah, something that could possibly compromise the workplace investigation you'd want to stay away from. I agree with you, not printing from the organizational printers. I bring my own as well, right? Just to make sure that you know, I can ensure that that's not going to be an issue for you down the road. So yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not going to use their tool where they can see all the information I'm inputting because what they usually get from me, and Devin's probably the same, they don't get my notes unless they're compelled at law. They would
Right.
get just the summary report and an attachment of the most relevant documents. And if they ask for additional information, I could go back and get something. But they're not like all of my investigation stuff lives with my firm, and that's part of the third party extension.
Yeah.
Very good. What transcribing app would you recommend for in-person interviews or investigations?
Well, I don't know what Deb might say here, but I don't do that. I'll just take notes of my own notes of what I heard from an evidentiary perspective and have the party, whether it's a complainant, respondent, or witness, review that afterwards and ensure it's accuracy. So I'll have that printer with me. I'll run off a copy of those notes and have them sign off to make sure that they're accurate. So I don't use transcribing tools. I don't know, Deb. I don't think you do either, but then maybe I'm wrong, but I
So,
don't
I
really.
mean, like me and Devin are both a little old. We said we've been practicing for 20 years.
Hey,
You can
wait
ask
a
another
minute.
younger person. But what I would say is, okay, so I've had a few organizations saying we want a faster investigation. Please use your Zoom transcript. So this is not in person, and I've used Zoom transcript. Fine. Because they asked me to, they don't want the note review and all that kind of stuff. But in person, even when I don't, most of the time I'm not doing that. I'm typing my own notes and I find the notes are so much more organized. And then I'm thinking about the questions and then they do review it and print it to ensure it's accurate. So I'm still not 100% on transcripts because I like to organize the information myself, to think about it, to digest it and ask the next question. Maybe that will change. And I'm sure you can use AI to find good ones to use. The thing that's nice about Zoom ones as opposed to in person, Zoom at least can say who's speaking. So it will say Deborah and then Devan and then Lindsay, it can separate it. So in person, I'm sure there's something that can separate it, but I don't know that in answer to that question. Sorry.
Not a problem. Do unions or union stewards then have the right to access a transcript from the union employee interview?
So typically my practice is I don't share interview notes with anyone and I ask no one to record me, but the union can type or handwrite the notes from the interview and keep their own set of notes. That's my practice. I guess depending on certain collective agreements and arrangements otherwise, some organization may have a different practice, but I don't share with my notes with anyone. I think it's for confidentiality and other important integrity purposes if the notes could be shared with others and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't either, and sometimes it's subject to the collective agreement as well. That sometimes witness statements are provided. I don't see that as much now that I used to, but as a rule, I wouldn't. Again, to Deb's point, that would only be disclosed, as required by law. If I have to go and be subpoenaed and bring my notes with me, but I wouldn't certainly not share it outside of the investigative process myself. So, yeah.
Okay, just have one more question here. I know we only have 3 minutes left, so I'll make it quick when I read it here. So investigator grade tools that involve fully offline AI transcription apps, for example, Voice Scriber AI, Transcribe, that keep an audio on device. These essential features should include 100% on-device recording and transcription with no cloud involvement, no user accounts or data uploads, verifiable local storage, clear consent, and audio trail capabilities. Do you see any issues with the above?
I mean, it sounds like it's an AI tool that doesn't share with the cloud, and so it's just being used. I mean, I guess it sounds okay. Like the thing I like about typing notes and having them review it is like a lot of times people want to change the word or they feel like they missed something. So I think it's like when we're taking evidence, it's not just about getting that the transcript, but it's also it's our job to ensure that the people telling us the stories, complainant, respondent, witnesses, confirm the story and their own evidence. So they're allowed to review it and change it. So if you're only using that tool and then they don't, especially if someone's being accused of serious things or someone's making serious allegations, if we don't give them the opportunity to sort of like review and verify and make changes, I think that we're not fully doing our job because it's not our job to be like a Dateline NBC, murder mystery investigator and like aggressive or whatever. It's our job to just make sure everybody's having a fair process. So I think if you're only using that tool, they might be missing some of that opportunity, but it sounds like that tool may not have privacy concerns based on that quick blurb that you gave.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. There are a few other questions, but maybe what I'll do is I'll send them to you afterwards and we'll see about getting some answered post-webinar. So again, another really big thank you to Devan and Deb for leading us through a great session this afternoon. To our listeners today, I hope you are all leaving with a better understanding of how you can really use AI responsibly while you're keeping that human judgment at the heart of every investigation. So as a quick reminder, you will receive the webinar recording via email the next day or two. Please feel free to share it with your network. And as Devan and Deb alluded, we do have a brand new program, super exciting that they both are facilitating for us, the Advanced Workplace Investigations Program. If you're interested, give us a shout. We'd love to have a chat with you. This program will be providing experienced investigators with opportunities to really strengthen their approach to complex investigations, including the use of AI and digital evidence. On behalf of the Queen's University IRC, I would like to thank you all for spending a little portion of your day with us. We truly appreciate your time and engagement and hope you all have a great rest of your day.